For those of you just joining, my name again is Aaron Lumna. I'm here on the Trust Cloud team. Um, so I will be your host for this session. We have a very special program for you. We'll just go quickly through our agenda. So we'll be starting off with introductions for all of the great facilitators that we have on screen, who you can see. And then we have a two-part special interactive program. So we'll start off with a panel discussion where we'll introduce the foundations of risk management, and our expert facilitators will explain everything you need to know to get started in the world of risk management. For the second part of the session, we'll open up our breakout rooms for an interactive portion, and there you'll be able to participate live in a discussion led by one of these facilitators. You'll be able to ask questions and work through putting together a risk register in real time. If you haven't gotten a chance to access our free risk register template, we'll put a QR code on the next slide, and we'll also paste a link in the chat in a sec. So after that, we will come back together to the main session and we'll have some closing remarks from our experts before sharing some additional helpful resources with you. So feel free to scan this QR code to access that free risk register template, or in a sec, I will paste that link into the chat. So leave this up for a couple more seconds, and if not, we'll paste that for you. Now, before we officially begin, I wanted to quickly tell you a little bit more about Trust Cloud for those of you who aren't familiar. So Trust Cloud has been helping countless organizations of all sizes get started in their risk management journey or upgrade their existing risk programs and bring them to the next level. Our trust assurance platform enables you to track risks across your business in real time, collaborate effortlessly with all of your team members, and equips you with ready-made dashboards that you can easily share with your leadership or board. We'll tell you more about that at the end of the presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our expert facilitators. Richa, could you kick us off with our introductions and tell us about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I think we can all agree, Aaron, you do have a space in comedy. You came up with good jokes to kick us off. So thank you for that. I've been with Trust Cloud for over 2 years now, and I've seen the risk management from both sides. I was an external auditor with Ernst& Young and Airline before I worked with a couple of industries. So I understand what the auditors are looking for. I also understand why is it tricky to maintain a risk register. So I'm really looking forward to dive deep with all of you guys and get to understand a little bit more about how you guys are doing in our workshop session. And with that, I will pass it on to Frank.
Cool. Thank you, Richa. And thanks, Aaron. I can't wait to see your Netflix comedy special one day. It's going to be great. Definitely have a future. My name's Frank Kayezi, founder and CEO of GRC Knight. The GRC stands for Governance, Risk, and Compliance. We have a vision of helping organizations achieve their objectives reliably and, get through adversity with integrity while also having fun, right? Making GRC less painful. Lately, we've been working with our clients around AI governance and risk. And yeah, I love Trust Cloud. I love Trust Register, and I'm really happy to be here to help you all on your risk assessment, risk management journeys. Pass it off to Steve.
Thanks, Frank. So I'm Steve Seidemann with Prescient Security. I run our advisory practice. I've been in the cybersecurity business for about 30 years, and I'm very familiar with risk as it has been managed at various enterprises and small organizations and things through various processes. I'm super happy to be part of this process, and I will say, Aaron, as a father of 7, I'm super into the dad jokes. So rock it on, man. Abir.
Hi, great to meet everyone. I'm on the product team here at Trust Cloud, and I build out our risk compliance solutions for the company. Really excited to be talking to you about risk today and seeing how we can help out.
Hello, everyone. I'm a sales engineer here at Trust Cloud. I've been here just about a month, but coming from 4 years of experience at EY, where I worked in internal audit as well as cyber program transformation. So definitely understand the challenges and looking forward to seeing how we can get you guys started.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And let's move forward with our presentation. What is risk management?
And I think as we go in, I would really be curious to see, Steve, from your side, being an external auditor, as well as Frank, like how have you seen this to be this described within the company? So Steve, why don't you start ahead with you, and then we'll follow up with Frank.
Sure. So I think, we see a lot of different approaches to risk management. What I think is maybe the most common approach is to take some sort of control framework as sort of the guiding document for how to do this on a sort of annualized basis, right? So oftentimes it's associated with a compliance effort, right? So the control matrix might be whatever compliance framework you're going against, so ISO 27001 or SOC 2 or something like that. Many organizations like the NIST 853 is sort of their set of controls. So we see that a lot, but I think all of those carry the same sort of fundamental problem, which is not customizing the risks to your particular organization. So I think that's something that we really want to talk about today is sort of how to do this process in a way that's better, more meaningful, more actionable to your organization.
Absolutely. And Frank, when you're working with your customers, and I know the AI risk management space is new, but like very essentially, what's the fundamental process that you describe risk management to your new customers?
Yeah. So, I like to say that in my experience, the best risk assessors are those that are imaginative and paranoid, right? The idea that you can imagine something negative that hasn't happened yet. That's creative paranoia, essentially. It's not great to feel paranoia. We've all felt paranoid various times in our lives. Some of us feel that more often than others. I feel like those folks tend to be typically the best risk assessors because risk management, risk assessment, I've seen a trend in the industry that it's a have to do activity. We have to do a risk assessment because we have SOC 2 audit or ISO. But if you think about our day-to-day lives, when I'm driving my car in a risky road, I don't have to think about the dangers on that road. I just do it. I just think about what could potentially happen that is bad, and then I think about what I can do, just keep my eyes on the road to not end up in trouble on the road. And I think when I'm working with my clients today, it's trying to transition from that mentality of we have to do a risk assessment to continuously, we're always thinking about risk. Leadership's always talking about risk. And historically, it's been, your risk register, Excel worksheet where you have your list of risks, you've assessed them, but also really driving that to be more something that's communicated continuously throughout the organization, reported, whether it's through KPIs and KRIs, or you have, projects around remediation of the risks that leadership has to approve on and sign off on. Just making it more embedded in the culture for an organization is what some of the work I've been trying to do.
Yeah. Creative and paranoia. That sounds like parenting, Frank, right up there.
Oh yeah.
I am on that side. So, all right. With that, I think on the next slide, we wanted to engage a little bit with everybody who's listening in. So, Aaron is gonna create this poll for us, and if you guys don't mind, just quickly responding to that as well. Just curious to understand how many of you are managing the risks or are in charge of the risk governance function within your organization, and how often do you report it? I have an inkling it's most likely annual in response to somebody like Steve, the auditors coming knocking, and you're like, let's get this updated. But I'm really curious to see what the results show.
Yeah, we'll leave this open for just a few more seconds. So
Sure.
now, please do, and we'll share the responses with everyone.
And while we are waiting for that, there's also a Q&A feature within this Zoom. So if you have any questions on stuff that we are covering or stuff that you would want us to cover, please feel free to shoot that in the Q&A as well.
All right. So looks like we have a good number of responses in. So I'm going to close out that poll. Thank you all for responding. So we'll share those results with everyone.
All right. So quarterly and annually are pretty much tied, which is good to see. And then great to see that everybody, each one of you, or most of us are managing the risk potions. The ones who have responded no, I'm pretty sure you guys are doing that too. Not in the formal way, but you're probably doing it as a day-to-day, some aspect as well. So awesome. Thank you for sharing the results, Aaron. So let's talk about the evolution of risk management space in itself. I think I can say from my experience, initial risk registers were like one or two items where it talks about some financial loss, brand loss, and that was it. Over time, with the way the technology has advanced, we have too many features. Our tech stack has increased exponentially. Our global footprint has increased exponentially, and it has led to this evolution of your risk management posture as well, because it's always evolving. And there's so many threats globally now. Like COVID probably had a huge impact on risk registers for a lot of industries in different ways. So maybe Frank, to start with you, like how have you seen that evolution? How have you seen the communication evolution within the organization also when they talk about risks?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I think especially for organizations that are a bit smaller, there's typically that role of the lone information security compliance manager who has to do everything related to security, privacy, GRC. The idea of them being the one to lead and do the risk assessment, and many times, often than not, they're the only ones that partake in this process, I think is a thing of the past. Now, some organizations still operate that way, but the idea is that it takes a village to come together and assess risk. And then also the idea of data-driven risk assessment and risk decisions, right? If you are in a community, your neighbors, and there's a project to improve the roads in your neighborhood, would you prefer to have your neighbor John Doe give his sort of analysis in terms of what potentially could go wrong, what areas of the neighborhood need more attention, or would you prefer to have a drone with GIS capabilities to do that assessment and say, oh, this block definitely needs more attention than the other because of the damages? I'm imagining we'd all probably pick the technology, right? The idea that technology makes better statistically driven decisions than the average person, and leaning on those machine learning related statistical driven decisions versus hypothetical guesses from John or Sally or me, for example, right? I think those are sort of the trends I'm seeing right now in the risk assessment realm.
Yeah, and I think that also has to do with the technological advancements, because now we are capturing so much data that it makes sense to find meaning from that data and then use that to make our decisions on that. Steve, what have you seen in your evolutions? As you mentioned, you've been in this field for a long time, from the initial days of the risk registers to how it's being used and communicated and reported on. Oh, Steve, you're on mute.
I am sorry. I think one of the things that I've seen is more nuanced views of risk, right? So I think you mentioned, like, is this risk more, brand risk, right, or is this more operational risk or financial risk, right? So I think we're starting to see more attention to types of risk, as opposed to just generically saying, hey, there's a risk here, right? So I think we are seeing attention being paid to things like um, mitigation strategies, to types of risk, how a particular mitigation might impact um, the risk scoring against those different categories, things like that, right? And I think we're just now starting to see AI drive into some of that. Where we're starting to see some of that, large language models being used to help make better predictive assessments about types of risk and things like that. So I think that's something we're starting to see. And I think the use of tools, right, like, these risk assessment modules that are super useful tools to help with scoring, to help with management of risk registers and things like that. So a move away from the manual sort of clunky ways of managing risk and into more tool driven mechanisms. So I think those are sort of big trends that I see in this space.
Yeah, and another thing we also see is like many organizations try to track their risks to meet a requirement, right? And one thing that I would challenge everyone in this call is start thinking about it proactively, right? Don't just, and that's something we also saw in the poll itself, right? A lot of people are tracking it quarterly or yearly, right? Just to meet that requirement. But if you start thinking about continuous monitoring and continuous, risk tracking, definitely would encourage everyone on this call to start thinking about it that way.
Yeah, and just I wanted to add to that too. You brought up continuous monitoring, CONMON, a common phrase in FedRAMP, right? Where risk is more than just the risks you identify with your brain, but also vulnerability scans, right? The world of threat and vulnerability management. I've been seeing the trend of using the identification of vulnerabilities to determine what the attack surface is for an organization and determine where the risks are that way as well too.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think the risks are historically thought of as a IT or security owned, but there are risks coming in from your HR systems, your brand, your marketing probably brings in a lot of risks. One of the things that I have seen that has evolved, and a lot of us on the call might still be struggling with, is how do you bring all of those risks and find a common way to communicate about it? Abir, do you want to kind of emphasize on how we can use certain metrics to help level set the field on, is this risk actually high risk versus is this medium? What kind of a commonality can we bring to those conversations?
Yeah, of course. I think, it comes back to how do you sort of quantify risk from a business impact perspective? Sometimes simply saying unauthorized access to data and using that to justify why an organization should prioritize it is a very, very challenging ask, because you constantly get stuck in the conversation around, is this very high? Is this very low? So one of the more prevalent methodologies that we can use, of course, there's SAFE out there that leverages cyber risk qualification and other models to predict the financial impact using control and loss exceedance curves as an example. I think there's a more simplified approach that all of us can use on a day-to-day basis, which is components of primary and secondary loss as examples. And this is derived in part from FAIR, where you're listing out the best case and the worst case scenario for how much money or how much financial impact would take place if a risk would materialize. So to give you an example, if there is a loss of a device, then the cost of a device, cost of the data on it, to replace it, to track the person down, to secure the equipment that's been lost. These would be examples of primary loss. And then secondary loss could indicate things like, if that data gets compromised, what customers are impacted, what contracts may be impacted. These are just examples of what that secondary loss component can look like. But holistically, there's a more simplified approach of just calculating what is that potential financial impact and providing a range or an estimate for what is that lower bound and upper bound, just so that when you go into some of these risk meetings or you go into a risk budget prioritization session, you have financial amounts to back why something is very high or very low, rather than having to justify the scoring equations that are typically driving the models today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great level set, because otherwise everybody just has this own internal segments of this is high, medium, low. You associate it with dollar values. Now everybody know what a high, medium, low for the organization is, and that defines your thresholds, you defines your risks appetite, and those things as well. Before moving on, Steve, calling on you, have you seen a lot of the financial impacts being added to the current risk methodologies that you've seen with various of your customers, or same with you, Frank, as well?
I would say sometimes. I think we see that some of the time. I think where I often find myself having to dive a little deeper with clients who are struggling with risk assessment is in really thinking about the threat model first, right? So who or what is likely to have some kind of negative impact on your business, and then driving from that into, well, how could that particular threat source have some sort of negative impact on your business? And I think having that sort of mindset, right, that sort of goes to that mindset that Frank was talking about of the paranoia piece of this, right? Like, do you have competitors that are actively out to get you and be willing to hire a hacker to break into your systems to steal competitive data, right? That happens. It's not super common, but it's a thing. Depends on the type of business you're in and how competitive your intellectual property is, kind of things are. Similarly, things like if you're in a business that's politically unpopular in some sort of way, right? We used to see this a lot with the smoking industry, for example, right? The cigarette manufacturers had a significant threat from hacktivists, people who would try to break into their systems and do damage to their systems because they were against smoking. So, I think we see that sort of stuff, depending a little bit on the industry that you're in. Like I say, politics sometimes play into that. Often, people don't necessarily understand the value of their assets or their intellectual property to certain kinds of attackers. I think a lot of people think, well, who wants to break into my business and steal my stuff? Well, if you have computing systems available for them, that's always something that could become, crypto coin mining systems or something like that, right? So there's always something of value that could be monetized by an attacker. Understanding these type of threat scenarios and how they can impact you, I think, is kind of the mindset, the paranoia piece of this that helps people really understand their risk.
Sure. And I think that kind of segues into the next slide too, where we're talking about different types of risks. And I know on the screen we have these, and there can be multiple different categories within each of these, right? Financials could also be your account receivables, your payout, all of those kind of things. Your operations can be in multiple different vectors, such as your HR systems, your legal systems, your vendors. I think we all know there's a whole segment called third-party risk management. So that is a very special, unique case in itself. But on the next screen, I think we wanted to just engage with the audience again and talk about what kind of treatment do you see in your environment when it comes to risk management? There are a couple of options. I feel like it might be a lot more ad hoc than these. Or my favorite one is in response to the auditors. So let's see. All right, Aaron, can we share the results? There's a big chunk that says risk management meetings, which I don't know about you guys, but when I was doing this, before this risk management meetings, it's a lot of heartburn to identify what exactly are we talking, how do I back up my numbers or show those treatments. I'm very curious, and if you guys can like put in the chat like what the other methodologies you guys are using to track these. Tickets is very common too. Getting updates from teams. Yeah, that we have seen. Like that's the ad hoc process of doing it. But yeah, I'll be very curious to see what the 14% has as what other methodologies are out there. But thank you to everybody for definitely sharing these results with us. When we come to our next section, these are your basic treatment types. And I think this comes from NIST. It comes from all of our risk management methodologies. Most cases, very few of us are lucky to think about just transferring. Not every time I'm able to transfer it out to AWS or have a Square. Sometimes I just have to bring it in, and then most likely I choose mitigation. In my experience, mitigation and remediation are the most common ones. The others, depending on your appetite, come along. But Frank, just want to wait, see what you have seen in the trenches.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but the most common treatment type that I see is acceptance through an action, right? It's you say you're going to create a remediation plan or a mitigation plan, and you either you don't set a due date or you do, but it's past that due date. And it's typically what I see a lot, but at least what I used to see when I was an external auditor, or coming into an organization for the first time to work with them. But remediation, mitigation, I think I take a pretty tactical approach to these two treatment types when it comes to mitigating and remediating risks using project management and KPIs, right? Treating mitigation, remediation efforts like projects. The epic is risk management, and you have little tasks, little project tasks with assignees and due dates. And if you're using a work management tool like Jira, the benefit of that is you can tie those efforts to actual ongoing work. Maybe it's in engineering or development or marketing or sales, depending on the type of risk. But the idea of being able to track the work that's supposed to be done, that's going to be done, and will be done on a timeline, and then having KPIs to track and say, okay, this many risks are past, this many mitigation plans and activities are past due. We need to raise this as a sort of issue to leadership. Taking that sort of tactical approach is what I've seen work best for organizations when it comes to remediation and mitigation.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think on the next slide, Steve, I want to focus with some of the conversations with you. There's a lot of interest about people doing risk management. What have you seen in your experience? What you look for, and where would you if you fail a risk management program?
Yeah, I think a lot of what an auditor looks for comes down to what it is that you say you're doing and whether or not you're actually doing that, right? So if you've got a risk management policy and a risk management procedure, and it says that you're calculating your risks in certain ways and you're taking certain kinds of actions, and that you have executive oversight into the process and things like that. Those are things that an auditor is typically going to look for some sort of evidence that that's actually happening, right? In particular, I think if you're doing an ISO 27001 type audit as opposed to like maybe a SOC 2, but I think that documentation of how is the risk being assessed is, if we say that we're accepting risk as a mitigation strategy or as a risk strategy, who's accepting that risk? How is that being documented, right? Is that something that's really happening, or is it just whoever's the compliance person is just kind of saying, okay, well, I'm putting all this stuff together and I'm just putting my name on everything, and that's sort of how it goes. And I think those are the things that can kind of get you into trouble, is not really having a well-documented process, not following the process that you have documented, or not having the right people engaged in the process, right? Those are the big gotchas. And then I think Frank mentioned, right, like a lot of times people will say, hey, we're going to mitigate this risk, but in reality they're accepting that risk because their mitigation strategy is 2 years long. Or it just never happens, right? We set some sort of timeline that we allow to lapse. So ultimately acceptance is the de facto strategy, as opposed to what you think your strategy is.
Yeah, and that's fair. But these things, Frank, how do you guide them to, just document everything, maintain that audit trail, and also to ensure that you're doing it in a timely manner before it gets expired?
Yeah, project management, right? It really boils down to, what is your plan of action? Do you have milestones to track this plan of action? And who's going to be held accountable if things don't go right, or if things aren't met? Who's going to be held accountable for any sort of issues or blockers? And I think that's GRC 101, right? Are organizations able to say what they're going to do and do what they're going to say? Are you able to plan your projects and actually complete your projects on time? If not, sometimes it's a cultural issue, or an organizational conflict where they're unable to get things done. But what I like to do is first understand the basic project management principles of an organization. When it comes to GRC, who's typically running the show when it comes to planning projects related to governance, risk, and compliance. And then from there, fill in the gaps where necessary. I've gone into organizations have built up project management workflows, have set up Jira, ClickUp, just to be able to get them something so that they can track the work behind the remediation, mitigation for risks. But that's typically, yeah, what I do.
And that's fair. I think now, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're getting into the actual workshop piece next so that we can do these things in action and
Yep.
get together.
Yeah, so I will open up the breakout rooms. We'll just randomly assign folks to those. So I'll open them right now, and those should send you over momentarily. And we'll come back in 15 minutes. So we wanted to bring everyone back, and we just talked a lot about risk management, how to use that template in Excel. As you might have gathered, it's a fairly manual process. It's a starting point, but there are better ways to go about managing and tracking your risks. And like I mentioned at the outset, Trust Cloud is one of those ways that you can do that. We have a tool called Trust Register that automates that for you, that we did want to share with everyone, and give a view into how it might help you. So Richa, I think I can give you the screen, and I will stop sharing mine.
All right, so with that, I can bring you guys into our module. But before I do, because I know Abhir is very close to our trust register and he has really devised it. Abhir, do you want to set the stage for this walkthrough?
Sure, of course. So
Yeah.
the fundamental problem that we're looking to solve is, we all just conducted an exercise in Excel where we identified a risk, we set its impact, we had conversations on whether it's high, low, medium, And then we went, we would have gone down the path of identifying controls and coming up with what that risk rating looks like. The fundamental challenge here is this entire process exists in Excel, and it exists on paper, but it doesn't in any way connect to the actual operations of the exercise. One of the participants in our group used a fantastic example of having to rely on subject matter experts to get that assessment of what that risk posture really is. If I'm an organization with a 2-person risk team and 150 risks, there's only so many people that I can physically meet in order to get an accurate assessment of each and every control, each and every risk, each and every impact assessment that I'm doing. What Trust Register is designed to do is take the project management, take the risk identification, and a constant reassessment process and automate that using programmatic algorithms. That's the goal for the solution, Richa, and that's why we're here.
Thank you for sharing that. And with that, I really want you all to welcome you all into the Trust Register. Since it's going to be a quick sneak preview, I'll only focus on the main highlights, kind of building upon what Abhir said, and also the exercises that we were able to do in our breakout room. Like, for every risk, you can have your risk impact statements, but there are too many moving pieces to be able to do that in a static way in your Excels or any other documentation. So let's walk you through how we do things differently with Trust Register. The first piece that wasn't part of our Excel, but that is very important, is for every risk to figure out who's owning it and which group is responsible for it. Having accountability on the ownership is key to making sure that the risk is being addressed by the right people with certain authority within your organization. And more importantly, along with this, I think the evolution of risk management is you have to understand who cares about this risk and where do you want to report this up to. So you want to assign which group do you want to report this risk right from the onset so you can keep everybody aware where you are. Coming down below, this is where you would be talking about your assessments. So you can talk about how do you want to assess this risk, again, from an intention of how do you want to report if this risk is being mitigated or is still at the same level? How would you test it out? We also want to associate a financial impact radius with each of these risks. So we provide you with lower and upper bounds, and there are a lot of industry benchmark reports. And also I had the fortune of working with somebody on our team that was from an insurance sector. So she had some excellent ideas on how to come up with these numbers. So I think hopefully you can find this useful. And then again, following your risk methodology, this is where you will now come back to give your inherent risk, which is in the absence of any controls in your environment. What is the likelihood of this risk happening? You talk about your target risk levels, and then you also talk about how you want to assess this risk. I think you can do most of these things in an Excel, but it is not dynamic and it is not current. And this is where everybody at Trust Cloud and Abhir has designed this product, where now you can come here and associate your controls directly with these risks. And not only that, for each of these risks, you can also come and provide a weightage on how this particular control is mitigating this risk for you. For example, in this case, you can say the clear disk policy, if it fails, yeah, it looks bad, but it's not going to make a very material impact to this particular risk. But if my MFA is failing, that probably has a 20% weightage on this risk materializing for me. And that's how we do the programmatic risk management. So you're not coming here and updating an Excel sheet. We are able to check your enforcement of MFA through our integrations with your key providers. And if MFA is failing, I can show you your risk status in real time. The other key component that goes along with your risk management is your treatment. And this is where you can also now track all of your action plans and your treatment task in a simple place. And just like with controls, you can also now start assigning weightages to certain tasks. So in an example, I think one of the examples we were talking about was your financial systems. And let's say you want to roll out MFA to your new financial system, Oracle, versus maybe an MFA to Gong or Zoom or something like that. You can provide a higher weightage to that treatment type, saying if the implementation to Oracle is completed, that brings my risk down at this %. Come here, assign that weightage. If this task is completed, the system will recalculate your residual risks. And that is a lot more proactive, fluid, and dynamic risk management than what you can do in meeting with your teams or those quarterly updates or the other, like the tracking through tickets. If you're not tagging it back to your controls, I don't know how you can show you continuous mitigation of that risk. It's not a one-time tag it to a ticket, close it, but it has to be a continuous Kanban, as Frank was mentioning earlier. Any questions or Anything else specific, Abir and Aaron, you want me to cover apart from the risks?
That was great. Thank you. Yeah. Abir, I'll defer to you if you have anything else to add.
No, that was perfect. Again, if there's any questions related to Trust Register or Trust Cloud, please feel free to reach out to us. Happy to answer them and get you guys set up with both these solutions.
And there's so many nuances to this that I know I'm not doing full justice to the product right now. But anybody who's worked in the GRC space and risk management, you know, there's so many nuances that we can cover into a detailed conversation. So I would love to engage with those conversations as well.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time left just for a few questions. I think we had a couple that came in. But one of them is, what are some of the reasons auditors fail risk management programs? Steve, this might be a good one for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I called out the most common problem that we see in audit, which is that you're not actually doing what you say you're doing, right? So in almost any kind of audit framework, the first thing that the auditor looks for is, what is it that you say that you do? What are your policy statements? What are your control statements? What are your procedure statements? And are you doing things the way that you say you're doing them? So that's the number one thing, is to make sure that you're doing things the way that you say that you're doing them. And then the kind of the corollary piece of that is doing it in the timeline, right? So we call that timeliness in the audit world, right? And Frank alluded to this as well. One of the things that he sees is people who say they're going to do something in a certain time frame, and then it just doesn't happen, right? So hey, we're gonna implement this control, or we're going to complete this task in 6 months, and the auditor comes in and says, okay, great, I see you have this task. It looks like that due date was 2 weeks ago. What happened, right? And that's the kind of thing that can get you into trouble. So having dynamic tools that help you monitor those tasks and stay on top of things is really critical there. And I think that's the biggest piece of it. The other thing that I think is really important in the audit process is making sure that you're actually doing a decent risk assessment, right? So if you're doing risk assessment as sort of a, hey, my SOC audit is coming up, or my ISO audit is coming up, and I know my auditor is going to ask about a risk assessment, so I better throw something together, right? You know, is that a real thoughtful, effective risk management program that you're engaging in there, when those standards require an actual thoughtful risk management program, right? So I think those are really the things that I think people run into problems with when an auditor's looking at a risk management program, right? They go in and they look at that risk management, or that risk register. Does it have an owner? Does it have outstanding tasks? Does it have accountability? Does it indicate following this thoughtful, intentional process of identifying and resolving risk?
Great. That's perfect. And so I know we're a few more that came through the Q&A, which I think we're kind of answering in line for folks. So we're almost at time. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate your time. I hope this was helpful for everyone. Thank you for lending your expertise again to our panelists. We will send out a follow-up email with all of the information that we covered. So we'll share a recording of the main presentation. We'll also share, again, the link to that risk register template. We'll share some additional resources that we think will be helpful for you. So look out for that for us in the next 24 hours or so. And with that, we will close out the webinar. So thank you again for joining. We really appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you.